Welcome, everyone. I'm David Rubenstein, and I've been given the task and honor of moderating a panel about what's going on in the West and how the West has united or not united relating to the Ukraine invasion by Russia. We have four distinguished panelists here. Let me briefly introduce them, and then I'll go around and ask them some opening questions, and then we will have time at the end for questions from all of you. I think you'll have a very interesting conversation. So on my immediate, or my far right, I should say, is Bill Keating, who is a member of Congress. He's been a member of the United States House of Representatives for 10 years. He is the chair of the House Subcommittee on Europe of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Previous to that, he was, for 10 years, a prosecutor, and for 22 years before that in the state legislature of Massachusetts. Thank you very much for coming. And who's running the House now? You're not, who's taking the votes in the House of Representatives now? You're here.
Well, where we should be right now.
Okay.
We're out there hopefully leading the way in the West and at a very critical time. So.
Okay. So there are a number.
Happy to be here.
There are a number of House and Senate members who are here, I think, at Davos, right?
Quite a few.
Okay. So on my immediate right is Paula Dobriansky. She is now currently a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Previously served as Undersecretary of State in the George W. Bush State Department and has worked in a variety of different positions in the foreign policy area. And she's a PhD from Harvard in foreign affairs and foreign policy. And she actually worked as a younger person, younger than me, in the Carter White House, where I was as well. I see my former boss in the Carter White House is there, Stuart Eisenstadt. And on my immediate left is Yulia Klemenko. She is a member of the Parliament of Ukraine, has been a member for 3 years of the Parliament. Prior to that, she's been a business person.
I was Vice Minister.
And Vice Minister and
of Economy.
Vice Minister of Economy and a business person.
Before that.
Before that, okay. And she is in a different political party than the current president, is
Yes.
that right? But she is supporting him.
Exactly.
Correct. And then on my far left is Mohammed Alam, who is the Minister of State of Bangladesh, also the Deputy Foreign Minister of Bangladesh. And okay, let's start, if we can, with a question. We'll start with the Congressman, and we'll go around the same question for everybody. Do you think the United States and Ukraine could have done a better job of preventing the invasion by saying earlier on that Ukraine was not going to be allowed to be in NATO? We kind of implied, and Ukraine was interested in being a member of NATO. Suppose the United States said under no circumstances would Ukraine be allowed to be in NATO. Do you think that would have kept the invasion from occurring?
No. I think if you look back at what Putin has said for so many years now, over 20 years, his desire with Ukraine, that was clear. But it was just rhetoric then until February 24th, actually since 2014, when he started his, unprovoked invasion of Crimea. So that wouldn't have changed.
Okay, so is there anything you think the U.S. government could have done other than what it already did to stop the invasion before it occurred? Is there anything we could have done?
I think there's a lot of controversy in Congress on both sides of the aisle that President Biden could have moved earlier. I disagree with that because the U.S. alone, in terms of sanctions, in terms of what it could do, couldn't do the job alone unless we're going to get involved in World War III. So I think the president was very skillful putting together a coalition of the West, the EU, UK, keeping NATO stronger. And it was with that strength that we've been able to do what we've been able to do so far. We couldn't have done it alone and been successful.
But since you've been in Congress, has any issue united the House Democrats and House Republicans as much as this issue? It seems like they pretty much agree on this issue. Is that true?
I think there's great bipartisan support for this. I think people understand it. They understand the threat to the rest. And our own security, what we have that China doesn't have and Russia that doesn't have is we have an historic coalition. They don't have that. And although we were coming back with the Biden administration repositioning, February 24th hit the accelerator, and in so many fronts that we'll probably discuss, energy fronts, economic fronts, as well as security fronts. We're together like we never had been, and we're moving quicker than we ever have been together.
Do you agree that there's nothing the U.S. could have done to prevent the invasion?
I agree with the congressman on the first question, no.
I think Putin would have gone forward, on the invasion, because I was commenting on, I thought you said on NATO.
Right.
On NATO, I totally agree with you, if you don't mind my responding to that question first. On NATO, I totally agree with you, because back in 2005, that's when Putin expressed very directly about the loss of the Soviet Union, and he said that that was the greatest tragedy. And then it was in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference where he laid out actually all the different elements that really have led to what we've witnessed, aggression in not just Ukraine, but in Georgia, as well as in Chechnya. On the answer of the invasion, I signed a statement with the Atlantic Council last year, 2021, and that statement both Republicans, Democrats, independents signed to President Biden, saying that you should take some military action or impose some sanctions as a deterrent for the invasion. So I felt that the administration should have given some stronger signal, but the other question is, would that have prevented Putin from invading? I think he would have still have gone ahead. Well, despite the deterrence.
Putin invaded Crimea and took it without essentially a shot being fired. Do you think if the West had done more, maybe he wouldn't have done this invasion? Or do you think the West basically had no choice and just let him take Crimea?
Potentially. At the time, potentially. Ukraine wanted to fight against the Russians in Crimea and also in Donbass. And they specifically did want to fight, and they were looking also for assistance. I think that if that had happened, I would question whether or not we would see the invasion now.
Right.
I think because we didn't, I think it showed some weakness on our part and a lack of support for Ukraine militarily.
So would you say the Ukrainian parliament is happy with the U.S. and Western response? It seems to be fairly united. Did you expect such a united response? And is there more that you think the West could be doing to help Ukraine?
We're actually very surprised that the West so united, and I think we should thank Mr. Putin for this unity as well, because we never saw it before. But I fully agree and support that if the Putin and Russia, not only Putin, but Russia was punished for Moldova invasion, for Georgia invasion, for many other, so to say, semi-wars, then probably we will avoid this very bloody war. Unfortunately, world is acted as it's much better to close the eyes because it's very far, and it actually led to the very bloody war. But invasion on this year or next year, I think, was inevitable.
How long do you think the fighting is going to continue for?
I think if we will have a heavy weapon and what our Western allies actually promising us, the shortest will be the war. So we are expecting that we can finish it, I think, by the end of 2025, if we will have heavy weaponry. But 2022, sorry.
Well, that was going to be a longer war than I thought, but okay. So you think by the end of this year...
but the audience is hearing,
All right, but the end of this...
good news.
At the end of this year, you think the fighting will be over. And my question to you is, there's two ways to end a war. You can have a treaty, and that takes a long time to negotiate, and we'll talk about what that could be, or just an armistice. People just stop fighting, and they don't have agreement. If there's any consequence, you just stop fighting. Do you think a real peace agreement will be reached, or some armistice where no fighting occurs, but there's no big agreement on reparations or anything like that?
Reparation is the second question, but I think the end of war for Ukraine, it's very clear, we are messaging it here in the Economic Forum, that the end of a war for Ukraine, it's our win, and it's all our territories back. That's why Russians shall and must go back to their territories, for all territories.
By the way, we are obviously in Davos, or Davos, as people say here. How did you get here?
I get it. It took 48 hours before. 48 from Ukraine.
It took you how many hours?
48.
48 hours to get here.
Before that, 3 years ago, I traveled for 6 hours from Ukraine.
Okay.
It was direct flight from Kyiv to Zurich, and from Zurich we took train. These days, it took 48 hours, 2 trains. From Kyiv to Warsaw, 20 hours. Then from Warsaw to Zurich, 2 hours almost, and then by train 3 hours. So and with some delays. So now it's yes, this is the.
All right. Was it worth that long trip?
Yes.
Okay. And by the way, it used to be the case, I thought, that it was pronounced Kiev, and now it's Kyiv.
Kyiv.
It was always
Kyiv.
Kyiv. Like
Always
chicken
Kyiv.
Kiev is not chicken Kyiv, it's chicken
No,
Kiev,
no, no.
right?
It's Kievska Rus.
Chicken Kyiv.
It's Kiev Rus, you know.
Okay, all
It's,
right, I didn't know that.
We're
Okay.
much more ancient than
All
we are
right, okay,
looking.
I got it. All right, so what's Bangladesh's position on all this? You've abstained in that one UN vote, and another one you didn't support Ukraine. So what's your position on all of this?
On the last one at the General Assembly, after the Security Council failed because of the Russian veto, and we supported Ukrainian resolution on the humanitarian ground. Now, where we come from, you need to understand, we have fought a war in 1971 against Pakistan, and 3 million lives were lost, and 300,000 women and girls were violated. So we know the price, the true price of a war. And that's why we try and practice a foreign policy of friendship to all and malice towards none. So now to answer, on the West's role, not necessarily United States, but I think it's not strictly government's view, it's personal. So there's a bit of a disclaimer here, is that West could have done a little better before the war because there are economies and big countries or influential countries in Europe who historically has done relatively better compared to the United States with Russia. There are interdependency in commerce and trade and energy. We know those countries. I don't think that enough was done bilaterally and not enough was done multilaterally. I think there are lesser engagement of multilateral players. UN should have stepped up there. If they knew Putin well, they should have stepped up their measures and try and avoid the war.
You had a ship.
Sorry?
Did you have a ship that was damaged or destroyed? In this?
Yes, very unfortunately, that was in the southern part of Ukraine, in Odessa. A Bangladeshi ship that was leased to the Dutch, and the third engineer was killed. Now, as far as the information goes, 3 months ago, there were no shelling in those areas. So we are still unsure who is actually responsible for it. And the ships were not allowed to leave the port. There were mines laid in the water, in the exit point. We are, in a way, directly impacted.
So who sank the ship?
Sorry?
Who was responsible?
We don't know.
You don't know.
We have asked both the authorities to come up with, clarification information. Of course,
Share with you
Okay.
information.
If
It was shot by a Russian missile because it's not about mine. It was missile.
It
They
was
just, exactly. How, there's no missile, there are no missiles, Ukrainian missiles.
So you're saying it's the Russians that did it?
Exactly.
And if you did a public opinion poll in Bangladesh, what percentage would support Ukraine and what percentage would support Russia?
Very difficult to answer, but the public suffering, and since we have families, every other family in Bangladesh has suffered one or another 5 decades ago. So largely people are against the war. They don't want to see general people suffering.
Largely people are against the war.
May I have a
Yes,
question?
go ahead.
If you are dependent on our grains.
Yes.
Yeah, and we are not able to export
Ship,
these grains,
yep.
ship to you, and probably you will have some kind of starvation. Yeah, people will not have grains if you will not buy it somewhere in the
We'll
world.
buy at a higher price, not starve.
Okay, okay, so you can buy it. But if you are not able to buy, if your people will support us more,
Sorry?
if you will
Okay,
let
well,
us get
I don't know if he's, okay. So let me ask you a question. Go ahead. You want to comment on that?
Because this is really important.
All right.
yeah.
I want people to understand this, that I believe there'll be more people killed by multiple amounts. More people will die by multiple amounts from starvation
Yes.
Starvation.
this fall
Oh, yes.
than on the battlefield.
Exactly.
And we're going to have a famine, migration. Northern Africa is going to be in dire straits. And that is something that
Changing
we're
of
working
political
desperately
regimes.
Okay.
to do.
Oh,
But
definitely,
that is-
I
Okay,
agree with that.
one at a time. So, okay, go ahead.
Forgive me,
Yeah.
may I add to that? It's key, President Zelensky has said quite often that this war is not just about Ukraine. He has said over and over that this impacts the global community. All are affected in this.
All right.
And here, it's not just about the battlefield. Heavy artillery is needed, multiple launch rocket systems. But in this case, they're also targeting Mariupol, as you know, but Odessa, to prevent the
Right.
grain from coming out. Egypt, I just want to point this out. Egypt, for example, relies 85%
Largest
on
importer.
grain
Yes.
alone from Ukraine and cannot get it. You are so correct. The geopolitical implications here and the economic strangulation of Ukraine and the global community is very serious.
Okay, so let's talk about the implications for another part of the world. It is said that China might be interested in invading Taiwan. Obviously, the President of the United States commented on that today, and while leaving aside what he said, he was fairly supportive of Taiwan. Do you think that this war is going to make it less likely or more likely or have no impact on China's willingness or interest in doing something in Taiwan?
I think less likely because of the way so much of the world has come together, because of the sanctions. I think China was the most disturbed, or among the most disturbed, other than obviously Ukraine and all the people directly affected, by Russia's actions. They play in a different field. Their field is the economic field, and Russia's creating a problem for them. I think they're quiet, but I do think that it's less likely.
And you agree with that?
I would agree with that, and I'd also just add a footnote, and that is, I think it's less likely because of the way we've acted.
Yes.
If there was not this kind of strong, unified support, it might be a different situation.
If President Putin, who's rumored to be ill, let's suppose he is ill, and let's suppose he has an operation and is incapacitated, or he leaves office, or otherwise he's not the president, would it make a difference? Do you think the war would still go on?
I think it would make some kind of disorder or disorganization inside Russia, because they see Putin for 20 years. He is actually probably the eldest leader, one of the eldest leaders in the world in his position. So he is 20 years in power. And the people, Russian people, they simply do not have any options and choice. Whom will they elect?
Okay.
I don't know. Head of defense, or this is you. I mean, they don't have Putin too.
Okay. Suppose Putin said, "Look, I want to get this war over with. I'm tired of it. Just let me keep Crimea, let me keep the Donbass area, and you don't go into NATO, and that's the deal." Would your country agree to do that?
The answer is no.
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 So you wouldn't let him keep Crimea?
No.
None of the Donbass?
We will
Okay,
kick him out from our territories, and then he can do whatever he wants. In his
Okay.
Russian soul, he has such a big country that he can do what he wants inside his country. He has very poor country, a lot of troubles inside. Why he is making troubles around the world and cannot manage his own country?
All right, so you need all of those things in order.
Exactly.
And what about joining NATO? Are you ready to say you don't need to join NATO, or you need to say that you're?
What we're discussing now is security guarantees like NATO, so to say. It's not a NATO, but actually Putin was afraid of NATO expansion, and now he has NATO expansion. Right. So with this war, he got absolutely, the opposite result that he expected.
All right, let's suppose there's an effort to end this war, have some negotiations, and the agreement says that the sanctions that the West has imposed have to be completely lifted. Putin would say, I'll get out of Ukraine, you have to lift all the sanctions, and all the oligarchs have to get their yachts back. Would the Congress agree to that?
First of all, what's important is what Ukraine wants, and that's why we're the U.S. That's our position. So it's important what they want out of this. So we're not going to be doing the negotiation. Ukraine will directly. We'll be there before. Russia will never be the same in the foreseeable future. They are weakened. And what's happening in the energy front alone, when I said things were accelerated, Europe for years has had to reform their energy policy. They would have been in trouble this year anyways with energy policy. This is accelerating them. 40% of their gas is Russian. 25% of their oil is Russian. That's changing, and this is changing quicker because of this war. So Russia will be hurt no matter what. So the sanctions themselves may not have the greater impact in the long run if we come to any kind of a ceasefire than the long-term effects on Russia.
Well, there's sanctions the U.S. imposed. There's also the assets taken from the various oligarchs and so forth. But what about the money that's been frozen? The U.S. has frozen more than $400 billion of foreign reserves of Russia. Do you think if there's an agreement to end this war, eventually there'll be some agreement, all wars eventually end, the U.S. would hold on to that money and give it to for reparations to Ukraine, or give it back?
That's the proposal.
Yes.
That's in fact indeed been the proposal. And
That's what
I
we're
think
discussing now.
Republicans, Democrats, there's definitely support for that.
Yes.
Given the scorched earth policy that was, and war that's been imposed on Ukraine.
So the U.S. would in effect have taken $400 billion and given it to Ukraine?
Correct.
To make up for what Ukraine
Okay,
did.
all right,
I mean, for Russia
Not-
did to
not-
what Russia
Ukraine.
did to
But
Ukraine.
let's
Correct.
suppose
to
you're the
Ukraine, but for
Chinese.
reconstruction.
Correct.
The
That's
Chinese
exactly.
have $3.2 trillion of U.S. Treasury bills. Suppose they did something we didn't like. Would we consider taking all of that and freezing that? Was that something that Chinese should be worried about?
If the U.S. is an aggressor for no reason, and we did damage to another country, then China should do that. This is the direct responsibility of Putin. And, you know, I think if Putin was gone, there would be a change. I've been hearing for years in Europe leaders say, in particular, you know, we know who Putin is. We don't know who will succeed him. It could be worse. What could be worse than Putin right now? Nothing. So I'm of the belief, I'm not worried about who will succeed him. Anyone would be less evil than that man.
What would you say the odds are that any oligarch who's had his yacht taken will get it back?
I would say very slim.
Very slim.
Slim or none. And that money will go to reparations, and there's great bipartisan support for that, and it should.
100% agree.
You agree with that?
100%
Well,
agree
suppose
with
you
that.
could have buy one of these yachts from the government or
No, we
something.
can turn
Would you
it
be
in-
afraid of actually having one of these yachts because somebody might come after you and say, hey, you had the...
You're asking someone that
Yulia
didn't
has-
worry about that.
we will
Yulia has
turn
an
it-
idea.
Boat
we
sank
will
twice
turn
in
it
the
into
last 2
worship.
years. So
Okay, turn in worship. Okay, so what is your
Luxury
view?
worship.
So your view from Bangladesh is that what is a way that you can give a face-saving way to Putin to get out of this mess? Do you have any ideas of how you could give a
No, it's
face-saving way
well
to
above
Putin?
our pay grade or my pay grade, honestly speaking. But what I'd like to say is the consequences of the war due to the short supply of grain is humongous. We have multiple countries in our region who is in political trouble, unstable government. I was in Africa 2 weeks ago, and I have seen suffering. The country that she referred to is the biggest importer of wheat, the largest exporter of wheat, and they are not in business now. So you can imagine, and you're not talking about one country. So the issue is not confined within the West only, not within Europe only. It's everywhere, 196 countries in the world. And war must end like yesterday.
Okay, now, the U.S. had intelligence that the invasion was going to occur, and they shared it with Ukraine, I believe, in advance.
Yes.
So did the Ukrainian government believe the U.S. intelligence, or because of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq not being there, the U.S. intelligence was not believed?
Yeah, we believed that, and we clearly understand that we will have war. And it was a matter of months. It will be in February, or in January, or in March. Yes, we were briefed that most probably we will be killed, all of us, including Parliament. And we are clearly understand in January that if we will not leave, we will be killed.
Now, you were not a supporter of the president's politically. You were in the opposition party.
Opposition.
Did you ever see any signs that he was like a Winston Churchill before this happened? Now people think he's Winston Churchill
It's a
reincarnate.
magic. It's
So
a
were you
magic.
surprised?
Yeah, somehow Churchill, rebirth.
You're not changing your political party because of this, though.
No, I'm not changing a political party because I'm very useful in a position. I'm all the time when I see mistakes, I can correct it. When you are a ruling party, you cannot say it. So it's much better to be in a position. Honestly, I am positively surprised by Zelensky.
Now, a lot of American politicians and European politicians have shown up in Ukraine to kind of show that they're there. Do you think there's too much of that going on, where it's like a chic thing to show up in Ukraine, or you think it's okay, Ukraine is happy for all the Americans and Europeans to show up and show their support?
You're all welcome in Ukraine, all politicians. But I think sometimes, politicians fixing their own problems by visiting Ukraine. It's political populism.
Oh, really? Okay. So today, you would...
But we are very welcome, so
You're happy.
you're welcome. Yeah.
Okay.
We are happy because when foreign politicians are in Ukraine, less missiles coming to our cities.
Okay. Okay, so today, how many Ukrainians have left the country as refugees? Do you know the number?
Left the countries, yes, 5 million.
5 million. And how many of them do you think eventually will come back? All of them or not all of
No,
them?
I think we will lose between 20 and 30% of refugees, and they will stay in different countries because and also it will depend on how long will be the war. If the war will be longer than 1 year, people will have new schools, new lives, new families, unfortunately, and they will stay there.
Right. What is it that the world can do the most to help Ukraine? Give money, weapons, food?
No food, we have enough. We can give you.
Okay, you got enough food. You don't need food. What about weapons?
Actually, what we need three heavy things, as I always saying. Heavy sanctions. Not these cheaty sanctions when you can pay in rubles, you can deliver oil through gray zone and some other, we are very well aware that it doesn't work, even with yachts. So then heavy weapon, which is MLRS systems and air defense, and also an anti-ship ships missiles, because we need to clean ports to deliver grains for the Bangladesh and many other countries. And the third one is heavy financing, because unfortunately we're spending all our budgeted money for war. And we need to cover our social payments and pensions and many other things.
The war, all wars end eventually.
Exactly, by peace.
So when this one ends, what is going to be the cost of rebuilding Ukraine? Is it $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $5 trillion? And where do you think that money is coming from?
What we can see now, and this is calculations, it's $400 billion that already we need to reconstruct what they burned and destroyed. Also, we have losses from 2014. Because they turned Crimea into the military base, and previously it was tourist base. And there's many ecological, very big ecological problems on Donbass and many other things. But at this point of time, we see basically we need for reconstruction 600 million for infrastructure, roads, residentials, and many other things. And again, if we will have long war, this number will increasing. If we will short war, then number will be decreasing.
Right.
As soon as we will finish war, and it's better for the whole world and for financial system as well.
So, Congressman, Congress has been very generous, some people would say, in passing aid for Ukraine. But what about rebuilding Ukraine? Is there a Marshall Plan that of staggering almost hundreds of billions of dollars that could pass the Congress, American taxpayer money, to rebuild Ukraine?
I think there's things we could do, and I think there will be a Marshall-type plan. It was interesting this morning in President Zelensky's speech, he was proposing having different countries of the world and different, perhaps corporations, different entities with wealth, adopting a portion of Ukraine to rebuild it and to do it. So he was talking about that this morning. Very encouraging in the midst of war to have the president already talking about rebuilding.
So let me ask you about being a member of Congress. There are very few people you can make fun of anymore in our country, at least. You can make fun of lawyers, maybe private equity people, but you can still make fun of members of Congress and nobody gets upset. So, except members of Congress, maybe. Why do you think members of Congress, people still kind of can make jokes about them? Why do you think people don't, like them as much as maybe their constituents do?
Well, I think you can't survive unless you have a sense of humor. It's one of the greatest attributes in life for any individual. And if you're in Congress, you better have a sense of humor, and it should be self-deprecating. At least I've always, So if you can do it to yourself, then you should take it from other people. Some people are thin-skinned, are very thin-skinned, and it's amazing. They don't last that long.
All right, so you're the chair of the Europe Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Other than Ukraine, what's the biggest issue that you have to deal with in Europe right now?
Well, I think energy is a huge issue, but it's interrelated. But I think really with Europe, the climate change issue overlaps that very issue itself. So there's a rush to get other types of energy other than Russian exports. But at the same time, we want to get cleaner. So you see Poland investing in a huge nuclear facility. And you see, even though it's not the best thing from a climate change, more LNG, these portable ports that are in place for LNG. So we're seeing the diversification. But at the same time, I think energy is one of the biggest issues.
Now, go ahead.
May I just add something on that? You couldn't be more right. We talked about economics at large, the military battlefield, but energy is a crucial piece here. And it might be worth at least indicating a positive trend. And the trend is, instead of that reliance on Moscow, because of the unpredictability and because also what we've witnessed, cutting off energy resources not only to Poland, Finland now, that actually many of the countries are looking for alternative ways. Germany, I've been very struck by the fact that Germany is looking at building an LNG terminal. It doesn't have one. Poland has an LNG terminal. And in fact, even here at the forum, there's the 3 Seas initiative, which is being spotlighted. And it's fantastic. Poland, right down to Croatia, all these countries are looking at alternative means.
Finland and Sweden say they now want to join NATO after not wanting to join it for a long time. But Turkey says, well, not so quick. So what is the U.S. going to do, or other NATO countries, if Turkey just says we're going to veto it?
I think right now there are efforts at diplomatically moving Turkey along. We know why Turkey has put this forward. It's over the Kurdish issue, the PKK. I think that there will be some pressures put on Turkey in order to modify that position.
Sometimes you can solve problems with money. Do you think Turkey wants any financial incentives to let Sweden and Finland go in?
No, I think Turkey, as we've seen, has actually looked for a leadership role in this crisis. As you know, Turkey was the one that hosted twice the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine.
If the President of the United States called you and said, look, be my negotiator to figure out how to give a face-saving way for Putin to get out of this and solve this, what would you say you would try to negotiate? What would you say is a reasonable compromise to end this war?
Well, first, I would go back to what the congressman said. I think Ukraine has to be in the lead on what course of action to be taken. Secondly, as for face-saving, I don't see there being face-saving. Quite frankly here, I mean, what is the face-saving? I think already, meaning for Putin, because quite frankly, I think there needs to be, as Zelensky has said, peace talks, and there should be some understanding of how we go forward. But that's not face-saving for Putin.
Right. So one last question for each of you before we go to the members here of the audience. In hindsight, or I'd say looking forward, do you think that the West will be treating Russia much differently in the future? And do you think West is much more united than it was ever before, and because of this, or do you think this is a plus as a result of Russia's invasion? The West and the NATO are much stronger than it was before. Do you think it is?
It's much stronger than it was before. Much stronger.
And do you think West is much stronger?
Absolutely.
And you think?
I agree.
And you agree?
I mean, the world pandemic took us to a new normal. This war is going to take the whole world to a never normal situation, I think.
And the person that is now the president of Ukraine, he's unanimously popular, very popular now in Ukraine, and he could get reelected as much as he wanted anytime?
Yeah, but we don't have elections before the war will end. So we need the short war, then re-elections, and then Zelensky will again be president.
Okay, so let's ask questions. Anybody has a question, just raise your hand, and I think they're going to have a mic. Is there, all right?
He's behind you.
Is there a mic behind? Okay, right behind me. First question is?
For Mrs. Klimenko.
Speak up.
It's a what-if question. Let's imagine Nord Stream did not exist. I'm not talking about Nord Stream 2, even Nord Stream 1. Do you think Putin would have unleashed the war, knowing that he risked cutting himself off a good portion of Europe in terms of markets? Because at that point he would have remained with just two pipelines for the gas. Do you think without Nord Stream, Putin would have made war?
I think without gas and oil incomes, Putin cannot afford war. Because actually, it's a 70 billion budget, annual budget of his army. This is exactly what he is getting from oil and gas. So the more he gets, the more war intentions he has. I would like to answer your question that not a single gas pipe was destroyed in Ukraine. How come? Distribution pipe, but a high pressure, not a single one. How come that such a destruction war without destruction of the gas system? It's not a gas. It's not about business and money. It's about it's a war tool. It's like a missile. It's like a nuclear bomb. So the same with food. So he is terrorizing the half of the world with starvation because we cannot export the grains. So this is two leverages he is using, and the question I have to the Europeans, for example, how come that you didn't implement first rule of economy, diversification? Why you are 100% dependent on Russian gas, oil, and other resources? How come for 30 years your politicians done this way? Now this is the first rule. I was in university in first year. I'm economist. The first rule, diversification. How come that you're all dependent on and you are slaves of Putin de facto?
I can give you an answer if you want.
Yeah, I have. Okay.
Well, let me ask you what about nuclear. You're worried about a nuclear bomb or any nuclear bombs being set off by Russia?
Yes.
You think that's possible?
I don't think it's possible, but I think it's possible that he will
Consider
do
that?
chemical weapon.
Chemical. Okay, other questions? Stuart?
To avert what the World Food Program says could be a real food crisis, a real starvation crisis, are there practical ways while the fighting is going on, assuming it won't stop immediately, UN convoys, Turkish convoys, to release that grain? There's some talk about taking some of the grain by train west, but are there practical ways to get the grain out of the silos and into the hands of Bangladesh and other countries that otherwise will face genuine nutrition and starvation problems?
First, we have, at this point of time, we have 22 million tons of grains that we cannot export. 22 million. And we need, it's either 6 years by railways or 3 months by ships. So we can deliver it to the world. For 3 months, we will have ports and seaways. So all our ports blocked by mines and blocked by ships physically, by Russian ships. What we do need to demine our territories, which we mine because we need to protect our territories, then demine Russians' bombs, mines de facto, and then to destroy Russian ships. For that, we need only one thing, anti-ships missiles. And we will do our route. Yeah, we can do a UN convoy, Turkish convoy, but this is one-time exercise. For next time, Putin will blackmail all of us again. So today he allowed UN. Did you see what he done to Mariupol? He didn't allow a single food convoy, our convoy, to deliver food to kids and women in Mariupol. 22,000 people died died, and including starvation in the 21st century in Mariupol, in Ukrainian city. He's done the same way to the Africa, Asia, and many other countries. Do not even think that he will not do. He will blackmail the whole world, but these food routes.
The
you
current
think,
estimates
go ahead.
are like 25% of what they have can go out through trains. So
No, it's 6 years to export it, but we have new harvest. We need to put new harvest somewhere.
When this war is over, how many people of you think Putin will be in power 1 year from the time the war is over? You think he'll still be in power?
I don't know.
You don't know. Think he'll still be in power?
It's questionable. I think he's vulnerable, but I'd like to add a
All right,
footnote
go
to
ahead.
that question.
Go ahead.
On your question, it's not the only issue is about the grain in Ukraine, but there's already great activism and focused on other countries that can fill in the supply chain. Romania actually happens to be one of the largest agriculturally based countries separate from Ukraine in Europe. It is already stepping forward and trying to fill out where those supplies go, like into Egypt and other locations. So one, there's an opportunity for diplomacy here. And secondly, there are a number of countries like Romania. Another one is the Czech Republic, in the sense they're looking at humanitarian assistance and the convening of an international, right.
Yeah, but you need to deliver to these
Of
countries
course.
somehow. Real
Of
ways,
course.
it's 6 years.
So you think Putin will be in power 1 year after this war is over?
I hope no.
You think he'll be in power?
Well, I wish I was a fortune teller, but the thing is, they wage war, we've seen in the history of the world, to consolidate their domestic position. And if the war in Ukraine has consolidated President Zelensky's position, we are told that it has strengthened Putin's position in Russia.
Okay.
And how do you address that?
Any questions? Anybody else? Have there one back here? Please get a mic.
Thank you very much. A quick one on the multilateral system. What has to change for peace and security governance to avoid this to happen again? So Security Council and so on. So if you have an opinion on how can we improve global governance and peace and security?
Well, I think the action itself will help prevent that. Seeing the West come together the way they have is extraordinary. There's nothing like it. There's no organization like that in the rest of the world. No one has that kind of coalition. And I think that's made things safer. And I think David was talking about Taiwan. I think it's made China reticent to be more aggressive there right now. So this is important in terms of a global impact. Again, getting back to the theme, this is just not about Ukraine.
Okay?
And I just add the UN protocols, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, Helsinki Accords have been totally violated. And then you had, as you know, the Budapest Memorandum, which of course Ukraine regrets giving up its nuclear weapons because its territorial sovereignty and integrity was not protected. Security guarantees will matter here, and I think it's going to be looked at very closely, not only in terms of Ukraine, but also in terms of all of these multilateral covenants, which Russia has totally violated, completely.
So question right here? Go ahead. Get a mic.
There is a hypothesis that one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, why Putin decided to invade Ukraine in 2014 and in 2022 is that he understood, because the West said it, that the West would not defend Ukraine, that the West would not engage, at least militarily, and the West recognized Putin's sphere of interests by saying that Ukraine would not become a part of NATO. But now, again, it's clear that the Russian army is not that strong. Again, with brave Ukrainian soldiers, we proved it on the battlefield. Don't you think that a face-saving exercise that would probably change, to some extent, this war, and may end this war quickly, and my understanding is that exactly what the whole world needs, is that when the West is now says, okay, enough is enough, we engage militarily, so we want to defend Ukraine, and then Putin says, okay, I cannot go at war with the whole West. Again, we Russians never wanted a third world war, so we already have demilitarized Ukraine, so we did enough, so he declares a victory, and the war ends. Don't you think that for the West to stop this war, the West needs to take some risks and to show some real strengths of the West?
I'll jump in. I think first, when I mentioned that a number of us signed this statement, we felt last year that it was crucial to show up front that we were united, that there should be military action, there should be economic sanctions imposed. Why? We needed a deterrent. But secondly, and you pointed it out, Putin calculated that we were weak. Withdrawal from Afghanistan, going back to 2014, that we told the Ukrainians, do not fight for Crimea and Donbass. No weapons were given at that time. And so, yes, he calculated the West is divided, the transatlantic relationship, and then at home, we're all fighting with one another.
Absolutely. He was counting on fatigue, war fatigue in the U.S., but also a change of regime, a change in leadership in Germany, and controversial French elections. He looked at all of this as a moment that he could probably act. But don't kid yourself. But he had this idea
from the
20 years ago, and he still has it.
But you asked about risk. I don't see this as risk. I see this as the appropriate deterrent. We heard Yulia speak very specifically in response to David's question about what's needed. We need to get the kind of heavy artillery so they can fight this war. And then you don't have to be worrying about troops. In fact, they have said, let's do it. But if you don't get the right equipment there, particularly at the port, which impacts the economic future of Ukraine.
60% of our export.
Correct.
We're going
Food
through
security
ports.
of the world.
So I don't see that as a risk. I see that we should do it, but there are some who see it as a risk. You know why? Because they see it as, oh, it's escalatory.
Given where we are today, do you think the war will still be gone at the end of this year?
I do. And I'm basing that on information and the opinions of our military leaders, our security officials. I think in a public setting, I have to always be careful because I have other.
You don't want to release
but
any
in a public
classified
setting,
information.
The chair of the Joint Chiefs, when I asked him the length of the war, he termed it as something likely to be a prolonged war, and that's
Leave it
cautious
at
way
that.
to put it.
All right, and what do you think? At the end of this year?
I do think it's going to be a
Still
long,
on.
and I'd add bloody war. That was Zelensky's words.
And you think it'll
Long and
still be on
bloody
by
war.
the end of the year, or you don't know?
I hope so. That's
And
my
you
dream.
think
We want the war to be over soon. I mean, Okay,
so we have time for 30 seconds left, right here. Irina? Irina, you need a quick question and we need a quick answer.
I'll be really quick. To give a break to Julia, Congressman Keating, do you think leaks from supposedly high-level officials from Pentagon, leaks about U.S. helping Ukraine and killing Russian generals, do you think it's useful or not useful in advancing your diplomatic policy?
First of all, I can tell you conclusively, they weren't leaks because it never existed. So nothing can leak if it doesn't exist. The U.S. was definitely not involved in what you're talking about, targeting specific generals or targeting this. We're not. We're providing assistance. We are providing intelligence to Ukraine, but we are not doing that. So those aren't leaks because that never happened.
Okay?
Russian generals, it's our price. So
How many have you killed now?
6 or 8, I don't remember.
I think it's more than that, but okay. All right, we are out of time.
The best one.
What?
I mean, there was best generals.
Okay.
The rest is.
Thank you all. I don't know if we resolved anything, but hopefully everybody learned something. Thank you all very much.